I'm Jake. I'm 41 years old, divorced, and a dad to the most incredible 8-year-old girl in the universe, Sophie. She's got this wild curly hair that never stays in place, a laugh that sounds like summer wind chimes, and a mind sharper than most adults I know. I've raised her mostly on my own since her mom moved overseas for work and decided the occasional video call was enough. It wasn't ideal, but Sophie and we figured it out. She's my whole world. My reason for grinding through long hours at my architecture firm. The one person who can yank a smile out of me even on the worst days. We bake cookies on Friday nights, build ridiculous blanket forts in the living room, and reenact movie scenes just to make each other laugh. She's not just my daughter, she's my best friend. Now, family-wise, things get murky. I come from a picture-perfect kind of clan, the type that smiles big for Christmas cards even if someone just stormed out of the room 2 minutes earlier. My parents are old school and obsessed with appearances. My older sister, Danielle, has always been the golden child. You know the type, straight-A student, homecoming queen, married into money, and somehow still the one who gets to cry about how hard her life is. If I got an A-, she got an A+. If I showed up with a new idea, she already had the patent pending. But I stopped competing a long time ago. It wasn't worth the constant feeling of being the backup singer in someone else's spotlight. Despite our differences, I tried to stay on good terms with her. I wanted Sophie to have an extended family, even if it meant biting my tongue more often than not. Danielle was never exactly warm toward my daughter, but I chalked it up to her being too wrapped up in her own life. She wasn't mean, just distant. Dismissive. Once, at a family dinner, Sophie excitedly told everyone she was learning to play piano, and Danielle didn't even look up from her phone. I remember Sophie's face, how her eyes dimmed a little, how she turned her attention to rearranging the peas on her plate. I hated that Danielle made her feel invisible, but I didn't say anything. Not then. Then came the wedding announcement. Danielle was finally marrying her longtime boyfriend, Andrew. A lawyer, of course, from a good family. The kind of guy who wears a Rolex to a backyard barbecue and still checks the time like he's on call for a Fortune 500 merger. They were planning this grand event. Cathedral ceremony, black tie reception, string quartet, plated dinner service, the whole 9 yards. It was supposed to be the wedding of the year, according to my mother, who repeated that phrase enough times to make me consider going temporarily deaf. I was genuinely happy for her. Despite everything, I figured maybe this was a turning point. Maybe she'd soften a bit, include Sophie in something, flower girl, junior bridesmaid, even just let her hand out programs at the door. Sophie was over the moon when she heard about the wedding. She asked me every day if Danielle had picked her dress yet. I didn't want to dampen her enthusiasm, so I kept saying things like, I'm sure she's still deciding, or we'll find out soon. But deep down, a small part of me already knew. A few weeks later, I got the formal invitation in the mail. One envelope. My name, printed in that stiff calligraphy font. No and guest, no +1, no Sophie. Just Jacob Carter. I blinked. Flipped the card over. Read it again. Still no mention of my daughter. I called Danielle immediately, thinking it had to be a mistake. Maybe they accidentally left her off the invite list. Maybe it was an oversight by the wedding planner. Hey, I said, trying to keep my tone light, just got the invite. Looks beautiful, but there's no mention of Sophie. She didn't hesitate. Yeah, that's not a mistake. There was a long silence on my end. I didn't even know what to say. She exhaled sharply, like I was wasting her time. Look, Jake, it's an adults-only wedding. We made that clear. No exceptions. We want a certain ambience. Kids running around would just ruin the aesthetic. The aesthetic. I felt my chest tighten. She's your niece, Danielle. And I love her, she said quickly, in that performative way people use when they're about to say something unloving. But we want this to be elegant. Sophisticated. No sticky fingers or tantrums during the vows. It's just not the vibe. The vibe. I repeated, my voice lower now. She's 8. She's well-behaved. She would have loved to be part of it. Well, she won't be, she said firmly. This isn't personal. It's a boundary. You can come, or not. Totally your choice. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, stunned. It wasn't even the exclusion that cut so deep. It was how casually she dismissed my daughter, like she was some inconvenience instead of a member of our family. Like she was clutter. Danielle had always been self-absorbed, but this felt different. Cruel in a cold, calculated way. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just said, "Got it," and hung up. Sophie was sitting on the couch when I walked back into the living room, coloring with her headphones on. She looked up, hopeful. Did she send the dress yet? And I had to lie. I had to lie to my little girl, because the truth would have hurt more than she deserved. Not yet, I said, forcing a smile. Maybe soon. I didn't sleep that night. I kept picturing Sophie sitting alone at home while the rest of our family celebrated under crystal chandeliers and string lights. I kept hearing Danielle's voice in my head. Kids ruin the aesthetic. Like my daughter was a smudge on a carefully curated Instagram post. And the worst part? I was supposed to be footing the bill for this wedding. Yeah, $25,000. That was my contribution to my only sister's dream day. She asked me months ago if I could cover the catering as a gift, and I agreed. Before I knew what kind of person she really was. That night, I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up, a dull ache behind my eyes and a knot in my chest. Something in me had shifted. Quietly. Permanently. And by the time I stood up and poured my first cup of coffee that morning, I already knew. This wasn't going to go the way Danielle thought it would. And that was the beginning. I kept it together for a few days. Or at least I told myself I was keeping it together. I showed up for work. I made dinner. I played chess with Sophie at night and helped her with her science fair volcano. But inside, I was unraveling in slow motion. It wasn't just about the wedding. It wasn't even just about Sophie being excluded. It was about everything this moment confirmed. Every subtle jab, every backhanded compliment, every time Danielle had quietly treated my daughter like she wasn't quite part of the family. This wasn't new. It was just louder now. And once I started noticing it, I couldn't stop. A few days after the call, my mom invited me over for dinner. Just me. She said she wanted to chat. I wasn't in the mood for whatever pep talk she had planned, but I went. I hoped. Naively, I realized now that maybe she'd be on my side. Maybe she'd say something like, Danielle went too far. Or, of course, Sophie should be there. But no. I walked in, and the first thing she did was gesture toward the fridge, where Danielle's engagement photos were plastered like centerpieces at a museum exhibit. She just had them professionally done, Mom said, beaming. Doesn't she look stunning? I nodded. She looks great. She's lost almost 10 pounds for the big day. She's really taking it seriously. The dress fittings have been exhausting, but you know your sister, perfectionist. I sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, waiting for the conversation to shift. It didn't. Anyway, she continued, pouring tea like this was some 19th century novel. I wanted to talk about the wedding. Danielle said you were a little upset. She didn't invite Sophie. My mom didn't look up. It's an adults-only event. She's your granddaughter, I said. And she's 8, not 3. She's not going to throw food at the walls. Danielle made a decision, she said quietly. And it's her wedding. Her vision. You can't make this about you. It's not about me. She looked up then. Her mouth was tight. Jake, don't do this. Not again. I blinked. Again. This rivalry. This constant push and pull with your sister. You've always had this resentment. I felt something in my stomach twist. Are you serious right now? You've never really been happy for her, she said, as if reading from a script. Not when she graduated early. Not when she bought her first home. Not even now. She didn't invite my daughter, I said again. Slowly this time. Like I was explaining it to a wall. To a family wedding. She didn't invite any kids, my mom said. That's not the point. You're all acting like Sophie's invisible. Like she doesn't matter. There was a pause. A beat of silence that somehow said everything. She'll have other weddings to go to, my mom offered weakly. When she's older. When it's more appropriate. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get up and slam the door. I just sat there, staring at a chipped corner of the table, feeling the final thread of hope stretch and snap. That was the night I stopped pretending. From then on, I kept my distance. Danielle didn't call again, and I didn't reach out. Weeks went by. Sophie stopped asking about the wedding. I think, in her heart, she knew. Kids have this way of reading the room, even when you try to shield them. I caught her once, trying on an old princess dress from the back of her closet. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the skirt. When she saw me watching, she said, "It's okay, Daddy. I like staying home better anyway." I hugged her so hard she squirmed. Meanwhile, the wedding plans rolled on. Mom would occasionally send group texts about dress colors, menu choices, rehearsal times. I ignored them. One day I got a message from Danielle asking for confirmation on the final catering guest count. That was the first time she'd texted me since our call. I stared at the message for a full 5 minutes before replying, still thinking about it. Her response came back within seconds. Jake, this isn't complicated. Just let me know how many of your friends you're bringing. I didn't reply. A few days later, I got a voicemail from Andrew, her fiancé. Hey Jake, it's Andrew. Just touching base about the catering invoice. Danielle said you were covering that? We're finalizing the contract this week. Let me know when the check's coming through. No greeting. No small talk. Just business. And that's what I'd become to them. A walking wallet. I didn't call him back. Now here's where things took a turn I didn't see coming. It was the weekend before the wedding. I got a call from my cousin Lindsay. We're not especially close, but she's one of the few people in the family who's always been real with me. She has no filter. No patience for drama. So when she called me out of the blue, I picked up. Hey, she said, without saying hi. You doing okay? Oh yeah? What? I just talked to your mom. She said you're causing problems and Danielle's devastated. I laughed. Actually laughed. She's devastated? Apparently you're threatening to pull out of the catering? I haven't said a word about it. Well, that's not what they're telling people. Andrew told Uncle Mark that you're trying to back out last minute and deceive them. That hit me like a gut punch. I hadn't done anything. Not yet. And they were already pre-spinning it, getting ahead of the narrative, painting me as the flaky little brother with a chip on his shoulder. Thanks for telling me, I said. Lindsay sighed. Look, I'm not trying to get in the middle, but they're saying some pretty harsh stuff. That you're bitter. That you're jealous. Jealous of what? Of Danielle, she said. Of the attention. Of her life. That you've always had this inferiority thing. I didn't respond. I just stared at the wall again, heart thudding against my ribs. You don't deserve that, she added, softer now. None of this is fair. Especially to Sophie. Yeah, I said quietly. I know. After we hung up, I sat with that for a while. The lies. The manipulation. The way they were already rewriting the story so that, no matter what happened next, I'd be the villain. That's when the ideas started to take shape. Not out of anger. Not out of pettiness. But out of clarity. They'd made their choice. They'd decided who they were. Who I was. Who Sophie was. And maybe it was time I showed them exactly what that choice cost. But I didn't act right away. No. I waited. I let the days pass. I let Danielle text me again, asking for confirmation. I let my mom leave a chipper voicemail asking if I'd gotten the suit pressed. I let Andrew send a follow-up email with the contract attached and a polite, thanks again for taking care of this. And I did nothing. Until the night of the rehearsal dinner. It was hosted at a private venue, a swanky little place on the edge of town that tried very hard to look like a Tuscan vineyard. Candlelit tables, expensive hors d'oeuvres, the kind of place where you get charged extra for asking for lemon in your water. I wasn't planning to go, but then Sophie said something that stopped me in my tracks. She was brushing her teeth, standing on the little step stool by the sink, when she asked, Are you going to the party for Aunt Danielle tonight? I wasn't planning to. She nodded slowly. Spit. Rinsed. She didn't invite me, huh? I paused. No, sweetie. She didn't. She looked up at me through the mirror. That's okay. Maybe she just doesn't like kids. It took everything in me not to cry, not to scream, not to drive to that venue and flip every perfectly set table on my way to the exit. Instead, I kissed her forehead, tucked her into bed, and told her I loved her more than the moon and stars combined. Then I went downstairs, opened my laptop, and made a few changes. I didn't sleep that night. Not a second. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, watching its slow rotation, hearing the faint creak with every turn. The kind of silence that stretches so long it becomes loud. I had a tab open on my laptop, still glowing faintly from across the room. The catering contract pulled up. I must have reread it a dozen times, line by line, fine print, payment terms, cancellation clauses. All of it. I wasn't looking for a loophole. I was just making sure I still had the power they thought I gave away. And I did. There was a clause, buried in the fourth paragraph, tucked into the bottom of a section labeled Client Responsibility. It gave the payer, me, the right to cancel up to 24 hours in advance with no penalty if final guest confirmation hadn't been received. And guess what? Danielle never gave me that number. She sent suggestions, hinted at guest totals, told me to lock it in with the caterer. But she never sent a finalized list. Not officially, not in writing. which meant I still had a door. But that wasn't the real issue. The real issue was that I was tired. Not physically, emotionally, existentially. I was tired of being treated like a bank account with a mouth. I was tired of being left out of conversations that affected me. I was tired of watching Sophie get swept under the rug because she didn't fit someone's aesthetic. And maybe most of all, I was tired of feeling like I had to earn a place in my own family. I was done. I spent the early hours of that morning in silence, watching Sophie sleep, making coffee I didn't drink, listening to the world slowly wake up while my hands rested over the keyboard, hovering. And then, just as the sun peeked over the rooftops and painted our living room in a quiet gold, I moved. I opened a new tab and typed in the name of the shelter. Brighthaven Children's Home. It was a place I'd volunteered at years ago during a company service week. A small, underfunded center that housed kids in transitional foster care, some of whom had been through unthinkable things. I remembered this one boy. He couldn't have been more than 6, who clung to a ratty stuffed dinosaur like it was oxygen. He followed me around all day asking me about clouds, what they were made of, why some were dark, whether they ever fell. That boy's name was Malik. I never forgot him. I called the director. She answered on the 3rd ring. Hi, this is Yvonne. Yvonne, hi. You might not remember me. I'm Jake Carter. I volunteered at Brighthaven a few years back. Oh, Jake. With the architecture firm. You helped us with the reading room layout. That's me, I said, smiling despite myself. She sounded warm. Familiar. Safe. What can I do for you? She asked. I took a breath. I have a donation. A big one. But I want it to be used tonight. She was quiet. How big? 25,000. There was a long pause. Jake, she whispered. Are you serious? I'm very serious. Can you do something with it? I know it's last minute, but I needed to go to the kids. Now. A party. Food. Blankets. Books. Clothes. Anything. I heard her choke up. Yeah, she said. Yeah, we can do that. I don't know how, but we will. Thank you. By 8 a.m., I had wired the money. And by 10, I had a call from the catering company confirming the cancellation. They were surprised, but polite. Said it happened more than people thought. I gave no explanation. No apology. Just said thank you and wished them well. That afternoon, while my family buzzed about hair appointments and boutonnieres, I picked Sophie up from school and took her for ice cream. She chose bubblegum swirl with gummy worms, her latest obsession. I let her have 2 scoops. We sat outside the parlor in the fading autumn light, our knees touching, watching people walk by like nothing was happening. Dad? She said between bites. Yes, sweetie. You okay? I nodded. Just thinking. About Aunt Danielle's wedding? I paused. A little. She looked down at her cone. I don't mind not going. I didn't know what to say, so I just reached out and gently brushed a fleck of ice cream off her chin. That night, I kept things simple. We ordered pizza, built a new blanket fort, and watched How to Train Your Dragon for the 5th time. I held her close, memorized the way her hair smelled like bubble bath, and reminded myself that no wedding, no reception, no white dress and matching napkins could come close to this. This was my family, and I'd chosen it every single day. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. The next morning was the wedding. A Saturday. My phone buzzed nonstop starting at 9 a.m. Texts from relatives, missed calls from my mom. A very short email from Andrew with just one line. You're making a huge mistake. I turned my phone off. Sophie and I took a drive out to the countryside. We brought a picnic, hiked a trail. She collected acorns and tried to convince me they were forest treasure. I let her believe it. We laughed so much that my cheeks hurt. For those few hours, the weight lifted. But the moment we got back into cell range, the messages came flooding back. Voicemails from my mom that started calm and ended in angry tears. Missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. A single text from Danielle. I hope it was worth it. It was. Still, something in me cracked. That night, after putting Sophie to bed, I sat alone on the back porch, a blanket draped over my shoulders, staring at the dark. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated. But instead, I just felt heavy, like I'd cut out a piece of my own flesh and handed it over in exchange for peace. Because here's the truth no one tells you about standing up for yourself. It doesn't always feel good right away. Sometimes it just feels lonely. The next few weeks were quiet. Danielle didn't reach out. Neither did my mom. Not even for Thanksgiving. I saw photos online, smiling faces around a long table, cranberry sauce in crystal bowls. the kind of curated perfection my family thrives on. Sophie noticed the absence. She asked if Grandma was mad at us. No, I said. She's just figuring things out. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if I believed it. Then, a week before Christmas, something changed. I got a letter in the mail. Not a card. Not a folded piece of shiny paper with a snowman on it. An envelope. White. No return address. Inside was a note, written in blocky, uneven letters. Thank you for the party. I like the chicken nuggets and the book about space. I want to be an astronaut. My name is Malik. I stared at that letter for a long time. My throat closed up. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt the tears hit my wrists. It all came back to me. His little face, that stuffed dinosaur, the way he asked about clouds. And now, years later, he remembered me. He remembered that night. The night he wasn't forgotten. That letter broke something open in me, but not in a bad way. It was like shedding skin. From that moment on, I stopped waiting for my family to reach out. I stopped scanning my inbox for apologies that would never come. I started filling that space with something else. With us. Sophie and I started volunteering at Bright Haven once a month. We helped serve meals, organized story time, donated toys. She made friends there, real friends. Kids who saw her, talked to her, laughed with her. And I saw something in her I hadn't seen in months. Light. Meanwhile, I poured myself into work. Not to escape, but to build. I pitched a project I'd been sitting on for over a year. An affordable housing initiative in a neglected part of the city. My firm took it seriously. By spring, I was leading a team. By summer, the city approved the proposal. I found purpose again. Meaning. And for the first time in a long time, value that wasn't tied to someone else's approval. Then, in early June, something unexpected happened. I was at a fundraiser for Bright Haven, helping with setup. Sophie was stacking canned goods in neat little towers near the front. I was pouring punch into paper cups when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned and saw a man with a press badge. "Mr. Carter?" he asked. "That's me. I'm Brian, Channel 9 News. We're doing a segment on community donors, and I heard you were behind that $25,000 party last fall. Any chance we could ask you a few questions?" I blinked. That was months ago. He grinned. People still talk about it. I looked past him, saw Sophie smiling as she helped a smaller boy arrange his cans into a pyramid. I nodded. "Sure," I said. "I've got a few minutes." He set up quickly, just a small camera, a handheld mic. No big production, but the questions were thoughtful. Kind. He asked why I did it, what inspired me, what it meant to give back. When it was over, he thanked me. Packed up. I didn't think much of it. Until the next day. That morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. Local father redirects wedding funds to children's shelter. It was the headline on the Channel 9 website. My face was in the thumbnail. Me, holding a tray of cupcakes. Sophie was in the background, blurry but unmistakable. The story spread faster than I expected. But it hadn't reached them yet. Not until the wedding reception. The news story aired on a Sunday night. I didn't even know it had gone live until my phone started vibrating off the kitchen counter like it was possessed. Sophie was at the table drawing dragons with wings too big for their bodies, her new art face. I was chopping onions for dinner when I noticed the notifications. At first, I thought maybe something was wrong. A friend in trouble. An emergency alert. But then I saw the subject lines. "Jake, is this real? Bro. Channel 9? You legend." I'm crying. It wasn't just texts. I had missed calls from coworkers I hadn't spoken to in months. Emails from volunteers at Bright Haven. Even an old college roommate sent me a screenshot of the news clip with a simple, "You always had a good heart, man." I didn't even realize my hands were still shaking until Sophie looked up and said, "Dad, you're cutting the onion all weird." I laughed, set the knife down, and pulled out my phone. There I was, on the homepage of Channel 9's website. The headline read, "Local father cancels sister's wedding catering. Donates entire budget to children's shelter." I clicked it open. It was a short segment, only a few minutes, but it packed a punch. They used footage from the fundraiser and spliced it with clips from Bright Haven's Instagram. Kids smiling, eating, dancing. At one point in the interview, I said something like, "If a child's presence ruins your aesthetic, maybe it's your priorities that need adjusting." I didn't remember saying it, but there it was. Clear as day. It didn't take long for the clip to spread. A parenting blog reposted it. Then a few influencers. Then some rando on Twitter turned it into a meme. Within 48 hours, It had racked up over 500,000 views across platforms. The story had traction. And the internet? The internet had opinions. Most people sided with me, said I was the dad of the year, a family hero, the petty king we deserve. But not everyone. There were the typical trolls, calling me spiteful or bitter. One woman wrote a comment that said, "He ruined a woman's wedding just to be dramatic. Kids don't belong at black tie events. Grow up." But I didn't care. For the first time, the world saw what I saw. Not just Danielle's exclusion, but the bigger picture. The idea that children were inconveniences unless they were perfectly silent accessories. That my daughter, and kids like her, weren't worth including unless they enhanced the photo op. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was philosophical. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice. Danielle, however, didn't see it that way. The reception was set for the same night the story aired. 7 p.m. sharp. High-end venue. A guest list of 200 people. 3 courses. Live jazz. Custom lighting. I only know all this because I'd reviewed the original menu in detail back when I was footing the bill. But now the venue was prepped, but the food never came. The staff didn't show. The tables were set with name cards and empty wine glasses. People showed up dressed to the nines and were greeted by silence. Danielle apparently arrived in a white Rolls-Royce 30 minutes late, like royalty. She stepped out in a custom Vera Wang dress, with diamond earrings borrowed from a family friend who does PR for celebrities. I didn't see it, of course. I only heard about it secondhand. Because at the exact moment Danielle walked into that room and saw the empty tables, the vacant buffet station, and the stunned expressions of her high society guests, I was standing 2 blocks away, under a white canopy tent in front of Brighthaven's doors, being interviewed again. This time by a larger station. Someone from Channel 5 had seen the viral clip and wanted to do a follow-up piece. They asked me about Danielle, about the backlash, about the fallout. I didn't give them names. I didn't gloat. I just told the truth. And the truth was this. I spent 2 decades feeling like I was playing backup to someone else's main character moment. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life. And real life, messy and loud and chaotic as it was, included kids with sticky fingers and gummy worm breath. Kids like my daughter. Kids who deserved a seat at the table. Not to be cut from the guest list like they were the wrong font. But even then, even after all of that, I didn't think Danielle would come for me directly. I was wrong. The morning after the wedding, there was a knock on my door. Not a call. Not a text. A knock. I opened it to find Danielle standing there. No makeup. Hair still perfectly blown out from the night before. But her face? Her face was raw. "What did you do?" she said. I didn't invite her in. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me. Sophie was inside watching cartoons. "You should probably leave. You ruined my wedding." I crossed my arms. "You ruined my daughter's relationship with her family." She threw her hands up. "It wasn't personal. You told me she'd ruin the aesthetic, Danielle. You didn't want her there because she didn't match your Pinterest board. It was a black tie event. She's 8. She's your niece." We stood there in silence. Her eyes glistening, but not from regret. From rage. "My reception was a disaster," she said. "People left. Sponsors pulled their offers. Andrew's firm, his partners, think we're unstable. You humiliated me. I didn't say your name once. Everyone knows. Then maybe you should think about why the story resonated so much." She shook her head, stepping closer. "You've always hated me. You couldn't stand that I got the attention. That people liked me. This isn't high school anymore." "No," she snapped. "Now you're just a bitter single dad playing martyr." I stared at her, heart pounding. And then I said something I didn't plan. "I didn't ruin your wedding, Danielle. I just stopped paying for it." She went quiet. Her face changed. A flicker of something, not pain, not remorse, just realization. "You think you've won," she said quietly. "But you haven't. I'm not playing." She turned and walked away without another word. I watched her leave. That night, I finally called my mom. She answered on the second ring, breathless. "Jake, you've seen the news." Silence. "I didn't do this to hurt anyone," I said. "But I'm not sorry either." More silence. "She's your sister," my mom finally whispered. "She's Sophie's aunt." My mom didn't reply. "Just think about that," I said, and hung up. I didn't call again. I didn't need to. Because by then, the ripple had started. Emails from people I didn't know. Messages from single parents. Even a letter from a retired teacher in Vermont who said, Your story made me feel seen. Thank you for standing up for kids. But something else started to form, too. A movement. It started small. Someone tagged me in a post. No kid left off the guest list. Then another user created a hashtag. Hashtag include the kids. Parents started sharing stories of their children being excluded from family events. Some of them were heartbreaking. Some were just absurd. But all of them pointed to a truth we'd all known, but rarely said aloud. Children weren't accessories. They were people. They belonged. And I realized I had a chance to do something more. So I made a decision. I reached out to a local nonprofit that did event planning for foster families. They helped organize birthday parties for kids who'd never had one. I pitched them an idea. What if we used the momentum of the story to fund community events, kid-inclusive weddings, block parties, graduations? Not just fund them, but celebrate them. They loved it. Within a month, we launched a pilot initiative called Room at the Table. The idea was simple. Every child deserves to be included, not just tolerated. Included. We raised 10 grand in the first week. By the second week, a local event planner offered her services pro bono. By the third, a well-known parenting podcast reached out for an interview. And through it all, Sophie stayed by my side. Curious, bright, drawing logos, making signs, designing a dragon badge that we gave to each kid at events. We were building something. Together. And then, one morning in early July, I got a call. The voice on the other end was calm, warm. A woman named Marlene. She was a producer for Good Morning America. But before I tell you what happened next, you need to know about the call that came before hers. The one that changed everything. The one that made me realize Danielle wasn't finished with me yet. Not even close. The call came 3 days before the Good Morning America interview. I was in the middle of a Zoom meeting with the nonprofit team, talking about expanding Room at the Table to another city. Sophie was home early that day, sprawled on the floor drawing something involving dinosaurs and confetti. She'd asked if dragons could have birthday parties, and I'd said, if anyone deserves cake, it's a dragon. That's when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, but then it buzzed again, and again. On the fourth try, I excused myself, stepped out onto the porch, and answered it with a cautious, hello? Jake. It was Andrew, Danielle's now husband. I hadn't heard his voice since before the wedding, back when I was still covering catering and apparently too bitter to be reasonable. I wasn't expecting warmth, but the weariness in his voice caught me off guard. I need to talk to you, he said. There was a long pause. I didn't fill it. You win, he finally muttered. You broke her. I blinked. I didn't know this was a contest. She's been in bed for days, crying. She won't eat. She won't talk to anyone but her mom. She said she's been humiliated publicly, and she keeps talking about how you've poisoned her image. Sponsors have pulled deals. My law firm won't even consider her for PR contracts anymore. We're out, tens of thousands in projected earnings. I leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. Maybe she should have thought of that before banning her niece from her own wedding. She didn't mean it, Andrew said quickly. She just wanted everything to be perfect. Yeah, and Sophie didn't match the curtains. She didn't expect the backlash to be this big. It's gone too far. I didn't say anything. He lowered his voice. She's talking about suing. That made me laugh. I hadn't meant to. It just slipped out. Sue me for what, Andrew? For canceling a catering order I legally paid for? For donating to a children's shelter? For not showing up to her spectacle like a good little side character? You embarrassed her. She embarrassed herself. Another pause. He sighed. Look, I didn't call to threaten you. I called to ask, what do you want? I stayed quiet. Name it, he continued. You want an apology? A statement? You want us to go on camera and say you were right? You want money. And just like that, it all became so clear. He thought I did this for attention, for power, for ego. He still didn't get it. I don't want a thing, I said. I already got what I needed. Which is the truth, I said. For everyone to see it. Not just the family, the world. There was a silence, so long I thought he hung up. Then he said, barely above a whisper, she'll never forgive you. She was never trying to. I ended the call. When I turned around, Sophie was watching from the screen door. She didn't ask who it was. Just gave me a little nod. I think she knew. Maybe not the details, but the weight of it. The finality. The next day, the producer from Good Morning America called again. Her name was Marlene. She said the story had struck a nerve with their audience. and they wanted me and Sophie to come on for a short segment about room at the table. I told her we weren't interested in drama, and she promised it would be focused on the project, the kids, the movement. So I agreed. I kept it quiet. No big announcements. No family invites. We flew out 2 days later. It was Sophie's first time on a plane. She wore her lucky dinosaur hoodie and asked if the clouds would look like mashed potatoes. They did. The interview was surreal. The hosts were kind. They talked about the donation, the shelter, the response online. They asked Sophie what she'd say to kids who feel left out, and she said, "Find your own table, or build one, and make sure there's cake." The audience clapped. I nearly lost it. By the time we got home, the donations had doubled. A local event planner offered to fund 5 full weddings for foster families. A major toy company reached out for a holiday collab. And my firm? They offered me a promotion, Director of Social Impact Architecture. Full support to dedicate part of my hours to community projects. A raise. A team. A new office. But that wasn't the real reward. The real reward came quietly. Through letters, emails, messages from people who said, "You reminded me to stand up for my kid." From teenagers who said, "I was that excluded kid. Thank you." From single moms who said, "I didn't know I had a voice until now." And eventually, from family. My cousin Lindsay reached out. She'd seen the segment. She said she cried. Said I did the right thing. Then came my dad. A single text. "I'm proud of you, son." I didn't see it then. I see it now. And then, 2 months later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. It was from my mother. It was only a few lines. "Jake, you broke something I thought couldn't break. But maybe it needed to. I don't understand everything you did, but I understand why. And I hope one day Danielle will too. Love, Mom." I stared at that note for a long time. Let it soak in. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt peaceful. That was the difference. I didn't win anything. I just walked away, built something better, and left them to figure out how to live in the world they built. I haven't spoken to Danielle since that day on the porch. I don't know if I ever will. And honestly, I'm okay with that. Some people need to lose access to you before they start to see you clearly. Maybe one day she'll come around. Or maybe she won't. But I won't let her absence define my daughter's worth. Last week, Sophie and I hosted our first room at the table family celebration. 45 kids. Pizza. Balloons. A rented bounce house. One boy ran up to Sophie and asked if she was the dragon girl from TV. She smiled and said, "Yup. Want to build a fort." And they did. Right there on the grass. While the music played and the sun dipped low and the grown-ups laughed and danced and took pictures that weren't about aesthetics, but about joy. That night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at me and asked, "Are we going to do another one soon?" I kissed her forehead. As many as we want. Because this time, we weren't waiting for an invitation. We were building the table ourselves. And there was always room.